All right, class, here is our last chapter, chapter 15, so hope you enjoy.
Regional Americans, Chapter 15. So when you think about the regions, you can think about things like Boston, baked beans, Philly, cheesesteaks, Texas, barbecue, the West, maybe Mexican food, Pacific Northwest, coffee, salmon, the South, pork and corn. Those are just some of the regional variations. Regional fare begins with local ingredients. Regional fare is home style, prepared with local ingredients, depends on agricultural conditions and seasonal variations. Before refrigeration, local ingredients were all that people could use, and they still have meaning today. For example, Vermont maple syrup, Maine lobster, Washington apples, Idaho potatoes, things like that. So I may ask you about some local ingredients. Ethnic and religious practices are important. You may have Italian pizza in Chicago, Mexican chili in Texas, Jewish bagels in New York. And there are a lot of food inclusions and exclusions. In Utah, they do not drink a lot of alcohol, but candy they eat tons of. So they eat twice as much candy per capita than any other state. And economics does influence food choice also, depending on how much money people make. They may spend more money on fresh foods, fish, seafood, prepared salads, nuts, etc. The Northeast. So the Northeast includes Atlantic coastline, mountains, and lakes. It's considered New England, New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania, and has the Atlantic coast, like I said. Lots of Native American influence there, and highest density of all the regions. Traditional fare of the Northeast includes seafood and game, corn and beans, and grapes, berries, roots, vegetables, etc. New Jersey is included in the Northeast, and New Jersey is called the Garden State because food grows so well there. New England cuisine. Native American meets British cooking. Common cooking methods of New England. You should know that they are roasting, stewing, and boiling. They have very simple fare, often made with cream, and they avoid strong seasonings. Indian pudding is an adoption of British hasty pudding, and they'll put cornmeal porridge into a loaf pan, let it firm up overnight, and serve it with whipped cream. So that's pictured on the right side. Meats, I might ask you about meats. In New England, meats are often salted and cured, and most recipes did not call for fresh meats. Baked beans were common and flavored with molasses or maple syrup, and pies were very common. They would have both sweet and savory pies. More New England cuisine. Seafood, very common. Cod, think of Cape Cod. So Cape Cod was actually named after the abundance of fish. The Puritans would boil cod, they would bake it, they'd put it in soups and stews, cod cakes, they'd make cod balls. Shad is a fish that was eaten by Native Americans and eaten in Connecticut. So now they do shad bakes. That's a picture of them doing a shad bake. The shad fish is put on planks and cooked around a fire. Clams are very popular, and clam bakes are popular. And Maine. So I might ask you what Maine is known for. Maine provides 2/3 of the nation's mussels and also provides the nation with sea urchin or uni. New England cuisine continued. Which fruits are associated with New England? I may ask you about fruits. There are two main ones. So there's cranberries that grow very well in the sandy bogs and were first cultivated in the 1800s, and there are blueberries. So cranberries and blueberries are associated with New England. Desserts enjoyed, they like pound cake, shortbreads, roly-poly, that's pictured there. It's kind of like a fruit roll-up in a bread, and they're well known for maple syrup. Mid-Atlantic cuisine. Settlers were from Germany and the Netherlands, so you had a lot of that type of influence. You also had some Dutch influence. Dutch imports. Let me ask you about these. So the Dutch brought coleslaw, head cheese, donuts, pancakes, and waffles. And head cheese is actually a meat that's made from the head and the feet of the pig. What foods were introduced by the Dutch? Like I just said, they also were known for spice, brandy, chocolate, salmon, and cinnamon. German influences. So German influences. Pork was the foundation of the diet, and all parts of the pig would be used. Scrapple. I might ask you who introduced scrapple. Scrapple is a well-known leftover dish. It was introduced by the Germans, and it's a combination of ground pork or sausage, cornmeal porridge, spices formed into a loaf and then fried in butter. And scrapple is pictured on the bottom right. Mid-Atlantic cuisine. Vegetables were very popular. They liked things like green peas, sugar peas, rhubarb, and potatoes. Lots of fruits and vegetables. They'll pickle them or preserve them. On the far right is watermelon rind that's being pickled. They're also known for the cheese steak. It's originally called Philadelphia sandwich, but now we often call it a Philadelphia cheesesteak. And many immigrants came with different foods. Italians brought pizza, spaghetti, calzones, cannolis, gelato, and espresso. And the Jews brought pastrami, smoked salmon, and chopped liver. And that's a picture of a pastrami sandwich. New Jersey. So New Jersey, I might ask you, which state is responsible for food technology? It's mostly New Jersey. They were involved in condensing and canning for soups. They inspected bottled milk, and they applied the first pasteurization to bottled milk, as well as personalized packaging for tea bags. Ice cream and affordable chocolate. So ice cream was brought from overseas and developed in Philadelphia, possibly as early as the 1700s or 1800s. They also developed commercial chocolate for bonbons. Before the 1700s, chocolate was so expensive that it was considered a luxury item. And Hershey's Kisses came from Philadelphia. This is a quick clip about history of ice cream. Beverages, beer and wine. So they developed American beer. This was helped by the German influence. And something interesting to know, New York is second only to California in wine production. Mostly make whites and sparkling wines. Health data, New England and the Mid-Atlantic. May or may not surprise you, heavy drinking is more common by 20% than in other areas. The Midwest. So the Midwest includes Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Minnesota, Nebraska, North Dakota, and South Dakota. 13% of the people in the Midwest are living in poverty. It's the largest percentage of whites in the nation. Besides whites, there are many Hmong and Laotian immigrants. Fare. Meat, vegetables, and bread. So it's very no-frills cooking, very kind of farm cooking, and a good example of American cuisine. Preferred meats, let me ask you, preferred meats of the Midwest are beef and pork. Preservation methods of the Midwest. You see two ladies canning some green beans there. So canning and freezing are the preferred preservation methods of the Midwest. East, North, Central region. This includes Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin. It's kind of bounded by the Great Lakes. They ate a lot of corn and jerky, as well as game meat. They would eat rabbit, squirrel, possum, raccoon, duck, and quail. Important crops of the East, North, Central region. So something that's important is wheat, corn, and soy. Let me ask you, wheat, corn, soy are very important. Horseradish. Horseradish was brought by the German immigrants to the state, and 85% of the global supply of horseradish comes from Illinois. So I may ask you, which state is well known for horseradish production? And the answer is Illinois. Dairying is very important. So which state is known for its dairy industry? It's Wisconsin, and Wisconsin is the leading U.S. producer of milk, sweetened condensed milk, butter, and cheese. And dairying was sparked by the arrival of the Swiss farmers in Wisconsin. They helped develop brick cheeses and Colby Jack cheese. East North Central continued many food processing contributions, the hot dog business, production of Velveeta cheese, standardization of yeast cakes, the U.S. cereal industry, etc. Other things, Cincinnati chili, that's pictured on the right. It's from Ohio, and it could be created many different ways. It could be just the meat. It could be the meat and spaghetti. It could be the meat, the spaghetti, and the cheese. It could be the meat, spaghetti, the cheese, and the onions, or with the addition of kidney beans. I'm going to stop here for now. West North Central. This included Iowa, Kansas, Minnesota, and Missouri. They had harsh winters. It was so cold they could use the snow to preserve their foods. There were many trappers. They trapped bear, buffalo, deers, elk, oysters. Oysters are not native to this area, so do not put that on your test. However, shellfish were actually shipped regularly via the trains, and so they actually really enjoyed eating oysters, especially for those who had the money. Agriculture, corn, wheat, soy, very important. Iowa contribution. I might ask you about Iowa contribution. Iowa is known for hog farms, and they produce 25% of all the pork in the nation. West North Central region. They did have some religious influence. Amish often made cornbread, they'd make stews, they'd make hashes. German Russians would make pierogies, little yeast doughs. They had something called tuna. This was introduced by the Swiss, and tuna was breadsticks topped with creamed green thickens with flour. So it's creamed greens, and it was thickened with flour. Ozarks. People of the Ozarks were woodsmen, and they hunted and ate berries, squash, and tubers. They ate things like sorghum, which the sorghum plant is pictured right there. The South. Southern lands are varied. They include Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Kentucky, Virginia, Tennessee, West Virginia, Delaware, Oklahoma, and Texas. They were very agricultural. There were many plantations. They grew tobacco, wheat, corn, cotton, rice, and the plantations were usually self-sufficient. There were a lot of ethnic groups. There's many Blacks, Latinos, Native Americans, and even Asians in the South. Traditional Southern fare, corn, pork, sweet potatoes, and grains were very common. South is often associated with hospitality. They did have a lot of African influence. And so what the Africans brought, let me ask you this, the Africans brought sesame seeds, watermelon, peanuts, and okra. The whites brought hogs, cattle, poultry. Foods of the South Atlantic. They liked hot breads, so these were things like cornbreads or spoon breads. Spoon bread actually was a cornbread, but it was mixed with eggs and milk, and so it was kind of like a corn pudding. They would eat all parts of the pork. They would eat the cracklins, the chitterlings. They would eat stuffed pork. They would eat the nose, the tail. Brunswick stew was a tradition taken from Native Americans, and it was meats, potatoes, onions, tomatoes. Fried chicken. Which state is known for their broiled chickens? So Delaware, I might ask you guys, broiled chicken is the state dish of Delaware. Very well known for its boiled chickens. Maryland specialties are crab, also oyster. And then Florida. Florida is known for fish, which is pictured there. Also known for little things such as key limes and citrus, such as oranges. Foods of the South Atlantic. Shrimp are really common. They would make shrimp pâtés. They would saute shrimp. They'd eat shrimp and grits for breakfast. That's pictured there. Carolina gold. I might ask you guys what Carolina gold is. It is a long grain rice that actually came from Madagascar. Filpi. Filpi is a rice bread which is added to cooked rice and cornbread, and which foods were brought by settlers but often mistaken as being native. So you should know this. So foods that were brought by settlers included tomatoes that were brought by the Spanish, melons that were brought by the Spanish and Africans, and peaches that were brought by the Spanish. So they often thought that melons, peaches, and tomatoes were native, but they were not. Foods of the South Atlantic: oranges and other citrus, grapefruit, lemons, key limes, like I said. 70% of the U.S. citrus crop is grown in Florida. German Moravians. So the German Moravians were a notable ethnic group, and they did a lot of baking. They cooked with a lot of fruits and vegetables. Cuban influence. Since Cuba is so close, you had a lot of Cuban influence on cooking. Make a rice con pollo, which is rice and chicken, black beans, Cuban sandwiches, and flan. And then the island influence was spicy foods. So that's a picture of a spicy pepper that comes from the islands. Foods of the South Atlantic. Foods of the South Atlantic, desserts were very popular. I have an ambrosia pictured there. It's sliced oranges, grated coconuts. It often has marshmallows in it. Sometimes it has kind of a custard in it. Again, they enjoyed all parts of the pig. South Central, lots of French influence and Cajun cooking. So Cajun was created by French Acadians and is most limited to the Bayou country, and they're really well known for gumbos and jambalayas. East South Central. This was Alabama, Tennessee, and Kentucky. Again, more ham, gravy, fried chicken and grits, pork sausage, hominy, etc. How are foods cooked? Foods are cooked in lard or fried in pork. And the game meat common is actually frogs, which right there are pictured frog legs on the bottom right. They would also eat bear, deer, and squirrel. Catfish was common. Catfish could grow up to 100 pounds. And then also okra, which is on the bottom left, and rutabagas were common. East South Central. So sweets were really common, especially berry pies. Beverages such as buttermilk and coffee were common. And alcohol. I may ask you guys about alcohol. So they made bourbons and they made whiskeys. Well, bourbon is a type of whiskey, but they're very well known for their whiskey production. I may ask you about their whiskey production. And Kentucky and Tennessee are the two states most well known for their whiskey production. West South Central. This included Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Texas. They cooked something called hush puppies. Hush puppies are pictured there, and I may ask you what hush puppies are. They're deep fried cornmeal biscuits. West South Central. Many settlers lived on small family farms. Common foods were corn, beans, native game, and beef. They had chicken fried steak. So this is what they would do with a tougher cut of meat. They would pound it with a mallet, coat it in flour, and then fry it and cover it in gravy. That's pictured at the top. Popular dishes included jambalaya, gumbo, bouillabaisse, and crayfish were often eaten. They harvest over 100 million pounds in 300 crawfish farms. They'll usually serve them at a crawfish boil, where they're placed in a gigantic mound in the center of the table, and then people can eat whatever they want. I think I'll stop here. West South Central continued. So restaurants in New Orleans are very famous, especially for oysters and bananas Foster. Bananas Foster is usually fried bananas that are cooked in butter, rum, and sugar. Gin Fizz is a cocktail with cream, gin, lemon juice, orange, and egg whites that's shaken and becomes really frosty. And then the oysters are pictured at the bottom right. The Rockefeller oysters have spinach sauce with them. Oklahoma has a high Percentage of Native Americans. Most states have about 1%, but Oklahoma has 8%. Texas, Spanish and Mexican influences. Tex-Mex cuisine, very popular. Bowl of red. A bowl of red is actually beans, beans with rice, or kind of a beef stew with red chili powder. And then barbecue sauces. They used 2 sauces in Texas. I might ask you about these sauces. The first sauce is called the mop or the sop. And traditionally, they would actually use a mop to slap sauce onto a giant carcass, and then they would cook that large carcass all at once. The second sauce is served on the side with cooked meat and usually has a lot of chili in it. Health of the South. As you can see, the deepest red colors represent highest obesity rates, and all throughout the South, obesity is very high. Also, stroke and cancer are high. Drinking is below average, though, so that's kind of interesting. West. So the West is a very large region. There's a lot of diversity because Hawaii and Alaska are included in the West, even though we have already talked about Hawaii. There's so much ethnic immigrant influence to the West. There's Russian, Japanese, Chinese, Spanish, Italian, Mexican, and Native American. There are mountain states and Pacific states, and half of the Western population lives in California. Most immigrants settle in the West, so 26% of all immigrants settle in California alone. Traditional fare of the West. The West kind of was more rugged. People were trappers and miners. They came to mine for gold. They also came to work on the railways, etc. They did not have a lot of money. And originally, food sometimes had to be shipped in. There was vast seafood and there was vast ethnic influence. Italians brought something called ciappino, which is on the right. And then the California Central Valley was a very rich agricultural area where people came to pick apples, pears, dates, grapes, plums, avocados, and cherries. The mountain states. The mountain states had lots of variety and included a huge span. They included Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, Montana. Things like venison were favorites. Other things, Colorado. Colorado, I might ask you, Colorado is the leading producer of the nation's lamb, and they call it Rocky Mountain lamb. Idaho, you may have heard, Idaho produces potatoes. They produce 10 billion pounds a year, and of these, 60% are frozen. And settlers in Wyoming, they brought bakeries, confectionery stores, French croissants, and German sausages. Mountain states have the Basque influence. So the Basques were an ethnic group of people. They settled in Idaho and Nevada. They often worked as with sheep as shepherds, and women cooked. They bought beans, pinto beans. They cooked them with lamb or pork. They brought potatoes, would make potato casserole with them. That's pictured at the bottom. Utah Roman Catholics grew many vegetables. They liked goat meat, and they used outdoor baking ovens. Some influence of the Utah Mormons. And then New Mexico and Arizona are considered mountain states, but they're obviously quite different from, Utah and Montana. They're much drier. It was harder to grow crops. And so corn, beans, pumpkin, and squash were very common. More mountain states. So Spanish introduced wheat, cattle, hogs, sheep, and chocolate. In the South, they had Native American influence, so they used fry bread, they had hearty stews, wheat tortillas. They also had pozole, chimichangas, menudo, chilaquiles, and tamales. They liked anise cookies and puddings for their sweets. And 2 vegetables from Mexico, I may ask you about these. So 2 vegetables from Mexico that are commonly grown and consumed in the Southwest include tomatillos and jicama. Pacific states. So Pacific states, they actually had acorns that grew on the oak trees. They used acorn flour in California, and they would have a process that could leach out the tannins, and they could make them into tortillas. There are many Spanish cultivated crops. Seafood. What is Oregon known for? Oregon is known for its clams. Washington is known for salmon and oysters, as well as crab. And California is known for abalone and sardines. California, huge agricultural presence, makes so much of the fruits and vegetables. Majority production of olives, walnuts, artichokes, garlic, almonds, apricots, nectarines, dates, figs, etc., etc. I could go on for a really long time. Dairying, cheese. Tillamook cheese came from Oregon, and Monterey Jack cheese came from California. Cheddar cheese came from Washington. Pacific states. The West Coast is known for fresh eating and local foods. There's many celebrity chefs and kind of trendy foods that have started in California. An example of a trendy food, which now we can buy all the time, is this pre-washed baby green kind of salad mix on the right. Wines. You have a lot of wines grown in California. And then you have Alaska and Hawaii. Alaska is very isolated. We talked about it a little bit in the Native American section. And Hawaii, sugarcane is the most important crop. And in conclusion, we will review for the final. I will put some sort of a study guide up. And thank you for being a great class.